Hello, everyone, and welcome to Database Security Office Hours for August 2019. Our topic this month is going to be Oracle Database Vault, and this is the first of several sessions where we'll be diving into different Database Vault use cases. As you may have realized if you played around with it, Database Vault is one of the most powerful security tools that we offer with the Oracle database, and most of the things you do with Database Vault are really easy. They don't take a lot of work. They're pretty simple to implement, but there are a few use cases with Database Vault that have some nuances to them that you want to consider. There's also, it's a very actively developed feature for the database, and we add new capabilities to it all the time. So with any luck, this will be the first of several sessions where we'll be doing these use case-based scenarios, and I'll be interested in your feedback once you see what we put together for you. As always, we're recording this session, just a quick reminder of that, and the recordings will be available on the AskTOM website. Usually takes me a couple of days after the session is over to get them up there. To see the recordings, just go to the AskTOM website, click All Sessions, and you'll see a list of previous month's recordings. We hold these office hours to give you a direct line into the Oracle Database Security Product Development team. We'll always have at least a couple of product managers on any one of these sessions. And just like with this session, we do them all the same way. We start with a presentation, or actually we start with some product announcements. Then we move into a presentation on some technical topic. And we finish with an open line for any questions you might have. You're not limited to the topic we're talking about. If it has something to do with Oracle Database Security, it's fair game, and we'll do our best to answer. Please do feel free to enter your questions into the chat during the session. One of us will try and answer the questions as we go along, and we'll review the questions during the Q&A segment so that everyone can hear the answers. With that, let's go ahead and hit product announcements. It's been a really exciting month for us, and it's looking even better as time goes on. We've been working on a cloud service called Oracle DataSafe for almost 2 years now, and we're really excited about it. It brings a lot of great capabilities for securing your databases in the cloud, and we started our limited availability period for it yesterday. If you are running databases in the Oracle Cloud, and you would like to get early access to the service, and this is at no cost to you, but if you would like to get early access to the service, you can play around with it and see what it does, please reach out to me and let me know if you're interested in applying. The only prerequisite is you have to have a database in the Oracle Cloud. It can be autonomous database, it can be Exacloud at customer, but as long as it's running in our cloud, it's fair game, and you've got an IP address assigned to it, obviously. And you have to be willing to, do some testing and kind of report back to us on what you find. We hope to move from limited availability to general availability sometime within the next, before the year is out. But like I said, we're very happy to get this out. We're also really excited that this month, if things stay on track, we'll be releasing version 2.2 of the Database Security Assessment Tool. The main development focus for this version has been better integration with multi-tenant architecture, and we've really done two things in this version for multi-tenant. The first, and for a lot of people this is of huge importance, is you can now run Database Security Assessment Tool from the container, and it will traverse into all pluggables that are open and attached to that container. So you can get a single report for not just the container, but for all the pluggable databases, one report run at one time. That's pretty important. Within the pluggables, if you're executing Database Security Assessment Tool, when we report on who has privileges, we now also report on container users, and we'll annotate those users so you know that you can't really modify them to pluggable, but they at least are there and have access and present a security risk. Kind of a minor enhancement, but it's actually pretty major, is we've had a lot of customers that have automated their use of Database Security Assessment Tool. They've wrapped it with a cron job to go out and execute it every week, every 2 weeks, whatever their standard is, so that they can retain separate runs of it and compare them using the JSON output, or even just look at the HTML reports. The trouble is our security tool, DBSAT, didn't work with secure external password store up until this version 2.2. And that meant that in your cron job or in your shell script, you had to include credentials for the database that you wanted to run DBSAT against. We have fixed that in 2.2, and Database Security Assessment Tool will now work with the secure external password store. So happy to see that. You'll be able to get that from my Oracle support here. Again, we're targeting before the end of the month. You should see this out. Just keep an eye out for the new version. Last announcement, OpenWorld is just around the corner, 16th through the 19th of December. We have a web page that lists all the database security relevant sessions. If you're coming out to OpenWorld, please go to bit.ly/OOW2019 DBSec, and you'll see a list of all of the different sessions. Our full OpenWorld catalog is available on the OpenWorld website. Just go to openworld/sessions. And the database security keynote is Monday, the 16th of September at 12:15. If you're going to be at OpenWorld, please try and save this time for the keynote. Our own Senior Vice President, Vipin Samar, will be delivering the keynote this year. He's a great speaker. He always has a lot to say, and he's got really fantastic insight into what the industry is doing. You won't want to miss this session. If you're a full conference attendee, you have access to hands-on labs. When the OpenWorld schedule builder is made available either tomorrow or early next week, you'll be able to register for hands-on lab, and this year's database security hands-on lab will focus on Oracle Data Safe. So if you want to get hands-on with this new service, play around with it, see what it can do for you, please join us in the hands-on lab. Those labs do tend to book up fairly quickly, so if you are interested, I recommend as soon as the schedule builder is available, you try and register for the lab. We're doing 4 of them, one each day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but we can only take 50 people in each lab, and in previous years, we've seen them fill up within a day or so of registration being open. Okay, so that's it for announcements. One more time, as we're going through the technical session, if you have questions, please do go ahead and enter them into chat. And with that, Rich, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Russ. Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Rich Evans. I'm an outbound product manager. I work for Russ Lowenthal. And today I'm going to talk to you about Oracle Database Vault, my favorite database security product. And we're going to talk about some advanced use cases around it. Okay. The first thing we're going to do is kind of level set. We're going to explain what Database Vault is, and then we'll dive into the details. So Database Vault is a licensable option of the Oracle Enterprise Edition database. It is mandatory access controls on top of your database privileges. So we tend to divide privileges into discretionary access control, meaning if you have it, you can do what you want, or mandatory access controls, which means that we can enforce when, where, why, and how you use it. So Database Vault is a mandatory access control. The neat thing about Database Vault is just how highly customizable and flexible it is. We can start at the top with a realm, which I call just like a bucket of schemas or objects or roles that we put in that bucket, and then we protect them. We can protect them with our traditional method, where we respect those direct object grants. So if you have select on the table, we still let you perform select on the table. We just block those any privileges. And we'll see that in our demonstration today. We also have mandatory roles, which mean that unless you're in the realm, we are not going to allow you to use your select statement. So we have mandatory realms, which say even though you have select, we're going to enforce that you must be a realm participant or a realm owner to use that on these protected objects. If we don't want to use realms, we could use command rules, and we could protect probably around 100 different commands with command rules. For example, we want to protect connect. We can make it so even if you know the password, you can't connect unless you meet the criteria of our rule set. So we want to make sure that you're not having those application credentials used or abused, and we can lock them down to only the app server. We can prevent alter tables or update of data or even alter system commands from happening. And command rules are always kind of a mandatory protection here, right? So you have to meet the rule set in order to utilize your connect, your alter table, your update, or your alter system privileges. Both realms and command rules use rules and rule sets to determine whether or not that activity is allowed or blocked. So we combine rules into a rule set. Those rules are evaluated either as all true or any true, and then you're allowed to proceed or you're blocked. Some common rules that we're going to use in our demo today. The first one you're probably familiar with is the syscontext. We're using the user env, the user environment context. We're looking at what the session user is, who the session user is, and we're matching it up to employee search. So when we log in, if our session user is employee search, this rule evaluates to true, and then we can probably proceed. Another rule we're going to use today is one that we're going to build. It's called change info, and this is a custom application context that we're going to write, and we're going to set an attribute called change ID. And so we're going to use the syscontext function, check our change info context, look at the change ID attribute, and make sure that it's not null. So these two rules are what rules we're going to use. We're going to roll those into a rule set. All right, so we have three scenarios for you today. The first scenario is around DataPump. So we're going to perform DataPump full exports, schema export, and a table export, both without and then with database vault enabled to show you the differences. Then we're going to use PL SQL, custom application context, and database vaults to enforce some of our change control business rules. Every organization I've worked with has some kind of a change control process. They may call it a change review board. They may call it a change advisory board. They may call them change IDs, change requests, ticket IDs, whatever they call it. They've got some method where they have a kind of a paper process that you have to follow to implement changes. We're going to take that paper process and turn it into a technical control within the database to enforce that our developers or our DBAs have a change request before they make changes to data or perform changes to the database. All right, in our third scenario, we're going to look at a new Oracle Database 19c feature for Database Vault called Operations Control. We call it Ops Control for short. And this feature allows us to prevent our container administrators from viewing data in a pluggable database schema. So this is really powerful. We can allow our container administrators to perform administration, but not go in there and query our employee search data. And one of the beautiful things about Ops Control is just how simple it is, and you'll see that toward the end of the presentation today. All right, let's dive in and kind of level set on what Oracle DataPump is and what we're using it for. So DataPump is a set of tools to load or unload data and metadata from the Oracle database. It replaced the old export import in about Oracle 10G. So before all that, we used the old export import commands to export our databases. And back then, we used to do backups with this thing too. So now we use DataPump to normally move data from a production database to a non-production environment, make some changes like that. We can do it across the network. The nice thing about Database Vault is it's got distinct components. We've got a command line interface and then some PL SQL packages. So we've got DBMS metadata, we've got DBMS DataPump PL SQL packages. We can perform DataPump across the network. So we can be on our development system, connect to a production database, pull that data into that dev system on an import, and not be on that production system at all. DataPump has its own set of roles that it requires. It requires the export full database role to perform a full database export, and we'll see that we need that in our demonstration. We can use those DataPump APIs to automate and to look at SQL views to monitor our DataPump progress. So this is really, and one of the advantages it has over the old export import is if you're going to export a 20 gigabyte schema, you may want to add parallel processes to it. You may want to monitor it. You may want to pause it and resume it. There's things that you can do with Database Pump and these APIs that you couldn't do with those old export import functions. And as a security guy, we added in Oracle Database 18c that ability to include or exclude the unified audit trail from these exports. Okay? So let's say you're exporting a database and you want to export some data and you want to give it to a vendor or you want to put it non-production. You probably don't want all that audit data going with it. So let's just exclude that audit data from being exported with our audits, with our data pump export. All right, so scenario one, we know that data pump can export database, schema, or table data. Security has a requirement for us to control the database exports, the schema exports, and the table data exports. We're going to do this by isolating our exports by database, schema, and table. We're going to use a user I named ExportDB for our full database exports. Then we're going to use a user called export schema as a proxy for our application account, employee search, to perform these table and schema exports. So we'll have a user called export schema and a user called export table, and they will proxy as if they are employee search, and they will export that data. They don't know employee search's password, but they can proxy and act like him and perform this data pump export. It's a really powerful way to get data out of the database without providing the application credentials to the database administrators or to the person performing the export. And then we're going to use database vault when we enable it to authorize specific users to perform specific data pump actions. And I'm going to get to that on the next slide because there's some nuances here. So now remember, database vault enforces a mandatory access control, right? Just because you have privileges doesn't mean you can use them. So in order to use data pump exports or imports, you need some additional controls here. We need to authorize our data pump user, or if we don't want them to perform it, we unauthorize them to do it. Everything we do today is underneath this DBMS MacAdam package under database vault. So we use this mandatory access control administration package to authorize or unauthorize our data pump users. For a full data pump export, our user requires DB owner. Now this is one of the most highly privileged roles that we have in the database vault environment. This allows you to export that database vault realms, command rules, any associated rules or rule sets you have there. So we want to try to limit what we can about giving this. So if we don't need to do full exports to the database, let's try not to. Let's try to use the proxy accounts and narrow this down by schema or a set of schemas where they can export that instead, okay? And since we are going to be using a proxy account, Database Vault also requires users to be proxy authorized. So again, we're going to call our DBMS MacAdam package. We're going to call authorized proxy user. And if we don't want them to perform that export to that proxy user, we can unauthorize that proxy user. All right. And also really important is that when we do this, this functions even if we have Database Vault rules in place or Database Vault realms enabled, okay? All right, so we're going to dive into our demonstration. I pre-recorded these videos so we go through them quicker and you don't have to see me mistype and search for the command. So we're going to first look at what we can do for our exports without Database Vault enabled. Let me get to the right window, allow the content, and let me make this full screen here. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is check the status of our Database Vault. So in our pluggable database, Database Vault is currently disabled. So we can look at our DV enabled status. It says false in our pluggable database. We've already configured it, so our configuration is set to true, but we've currently disabled it in our pluggable database, okay? So we want to show that our users can perform these actions, and then we'll introduce Database Vault into the equation here. All right. And then what we see here is we've got our export command. We're using our export DB user. We're going to perform a full data pump export. And the thing I also want you to notice here is that we're going to set encryption password. So we are going to use our advanced security option, our transparent data encryption security here, to encrypt this data pump export. So if you're licensed for the advanced security option, we highly recommend that you use it to encrypt your data pump exports, okay? So we put that on here as a password. You can choose not to use this as an encryption password. You can pass it a wallet instead. I've chosen, just for ease and simplicity, to put the password in here so you can see how it works. But I would recommend for your environment, you not put the password here in the command line, that you create a wallet file and you use that wallet file to perform your encryption or your connections via DataPump exports. All right, so the first thing we're going to get, oh man, we have some errors. So apparently we have no privileges on the table space. Well, let's grant our export full database. Let's try this again. We're getting the same error here. We're not able to create this master table. So the two privileges that we need to get started with this user, we had to give him the export full database privilege. We had to give him some table space privileges, so I granted him unlimited table space. You may want to narrow that down just to a few specific table spaces, but for this use case, I gave him unlimited. And then we're going to try to run it again. All right, so we've given him the commands, we've given him the access that he needs. Looks like our data pump is proceeding now. All right, we're seeing data unloaded. Getting down to the bottom here, we can see that it works. And we can see that we've exported our application schema and that particular table demo HR employees. All right, success. All right, so now let's try doing this as a proxy account. So you'll notice that I've changed full equals yes or full equals Y to schema equal employee. I've changed my username from export DB to this export schema employee search. So I am proxying as if I was employee search, but I'm putting in the export schema password. I'm still using my Oracle advanced security option, my transparent data encryption. I'm encrypting this backup here. And I can see that my export was successful now. All right, I'm going to do the same thing at the table layer. Instead of setting schemas equal employee search, I'm going to set tables equal employee search dot demo HR employees. And again, still doing my encryption. All right, success. So now we've shown that we can perform our full exports, our schema exports, and our table exports without database vault enabled. Now let's do it with database vault enabled and see what's different. Launch this video again, allow the content, and let's kick this guy off here. All right, so we are going to enable our database vault here. We use our database vault owner user. He's a container user, so we can access pluggables as well. DB owner, we're going to execute our dbms macadam.enable dv command, and then we're going to stop and restart our pluggable database. We're going to connect to that pluggable database by altering our section and query the DBA DV status role view. So we're going to look to see what the status there is, all right? So now we can see that we've got a true status for enabled. We're going to run this full export. This is the same command we used in the last video, full equal Y. We enable our encryption. We kick this guy off, and we have some errors. We have some insufficient privileges. All right, so we talked about it. I gave you this kind of hint ahead of time. One of the things that we have to do is in a mandatory access control environment, we have to give him the ability to perform data pump exports. So we have to authorize export DB as a approved data pump user. So now what we can see is that we can have some granularity here. Our export DB has a wildcard for schemas, and he has a wildcard for objects. He can export any schema or any object in the database. All right, let's try that again. We're going to kick off the exact same command, same user, same directory, names, log files, everything here. Now let's see where we get to. All right. We're still getting errors. All right, so what did we do? What did we forget? Well, we gave him data pump authorization, but since he's doing a full export of the database, he needs that DB owner role. So we're going to grant that role to him. Remember, this is a highly privileged, highly powerful role. So what we prefer to do is just do schema exports or table exports. But if we need to do a full export in a data pump in a database vault enabled environment, we can do it. Same command. We're seeing our export work now. We're going through. Let's check. Yep, we've got our employee search, demo HR employees there, and our job completed successfully. All right, so now that we've done the full, let's try the schema. We've got our schema. We're proxying as if we're employee search. We changed full equal Y to schemas equal employee search. We're still doing our encryption, and we already got an error. Okay. We have to authorize him as a proxy user. Remember, we have that mandatory access control. We've got some of these controls in place here. So we need to authorize export schema to be able to proxy and act as if he is employee search. Kick it off again, same exact command, same schemas, same encryption. All right, we successfully exported the schema this time. All right, now let's do the same thing for export table. Proxying as employee search. We changed schemas equal employee search to that specific table. We hit that same error. Now I'm thinking, okay, I know what to do. I authorize the proxy user. I'm going to export table and allow him to proxy as employee search. All right, so we've got that in place. All right, so because he's acting as the employee search user, he can export employee search's schema. So we've been able to successfully export a full database with DataPump, or database vault enabled. We've been able to data pump a schema with database vault enabled, as well as a table by adding those additional controls. One thing I want to show you guys is if we come to the documentation, let me pull up the documentation. There's some good views in here, and this is the Oracle 19c documentation. I'm looking at the administrator's guide for database vault. And if we look here, we can see we've got our authorized views here. You can see some other things in here. If you're going to do DB capture, what authorizations are there. We can scroll down and see what job authorization. So if you're using Oracle Scheduler in a database vault enabled environment, you may need to add in job authorizations. If we use Aura debug, we need to decide whether or not we allow a user to execute that. So we've got these mandatory access controls. So even if you're a DBA, even if you're a sys, even if you're a highly privileged user, we want to control how you use those privileges, right? And then down here, we can see our proxy off view. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit here, and I'm going to look at the APIs here. So the APIs, you can see we've got our authorized DataPump user. So if you scroll through this DBMS MacAdam general system maintenance procedures, you can get an idea of what you can authorize and what you unauthorize. You can scroll through here and see what's going on here. In 19C, there's a couple new ones here, like this add app exemption. This is around our ops control, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in our third example. Another good section to look at for database vault is this chapter 12, where we look at DBA operations in a Oracle Database Vault enabled environment. So it talks to you about how to use Database Vault with Enterprise Manager, DataPump, Oracle Scheduler, Lifecycle Management, Replay. So there's lots of good information in here. So you can use Database Vault. You can continue to use the tools you've always been used, but in a Database Vault enabled database. All right, let's move on to our second scenario here. Our second scenario is around that change control process, right? Every company has a change control process, a change review board, a ticketing system. They've got some way that they want to control who makes changes in production and when they go into place. Our scenario is we've got Dave, he's a developer. He has access to production data to perform deployments or manual changes. As much as we'd like to keep the developers or even the DBAs out of production databases, it's generally not the most realistic scenario. Someone's going to have to go in there and manually change something or create something or add something. But let's enforce some change control here with technical controls. So our security team has said that we need to ensure that Dave and others cannot perform a production data change without having the proper change control. Yeah, it's easier said than done, right? But we're going to use Oracle Database Vault, and we're going to enforce that at the database layer. We're going to create PL SQL. We're going to create a custom application context. We're going to use our package and procedure that we create. And then we're going to have a Database Vault command rule to verify that our application context is set. And let me kind of explain in more detail what that's going to look like. We're going to create a custom application context for our change control ID. So very similar to our user ENV that we saw where we were looking to see what the section user is, we're going to do that here. We're going to create a PL SQL package to execute one command, dbms session.setContext. We're going to set our custom application context. So it's going to fire this exact command here, dbms session.setContext, set our change info context, set the attribute change ID, and set it to the value that we pass it in our packet, in our procedure. We're going to have a database vault rule that checks to make sure the value is set. We use this context. We look at the context of our change info. We look at that attribute change ID and make sure that it's not null. If it's not null, then it'll evaluate to true. If the database vault rule evaluates to true, then our database vault command rule allows that SQL to execute. Now, this is a very simple use case here, and you can take this in multiple directions. We want to get you thinking about what you could do with database vault and with PL SQL. It's very powerful, very flexible. You know, we could change this so instead of just firing a single rule, we could fire multiple rules. We could check for roles. There's lots of things we could do with this that we're just scratching the surface on. All right, so let's go ahead and check this video out. Again, I've pre-recorded all these videos, so you don't have to watch me type. Let's make this a full screen. So let's check our database vault environment. So here you can see that in our container database, our database vault is enabled. It's configured and enabled. Let's look at our pluggable database. We're connecting to our PDB1. We can see that our database vault is currently disabled. Okay, it's set to false. So let's go ahead and change that. Let's enable database vault in our container database. We're going to close our database. We're going to open our database, and we're going to check that status again. All right, now our DB enable status has gone from false to true. Now let's go ahead and create our user, our developer, Dave. One thing I want to point out to you here is that we are connecting as a container user, C## DB account manager. This is a user that has the DB account manager role in our database vaults environment. When we enable database vault, it creates multiple roles and it breaks responsibility out by those roles. So this user, DB account manager, has a role called DB account manager, and he can create accounts, alter accounts, drop accounts, and grant connect privileges. So I'm using him to perform that administration. When we configure and enable database vault, SYS no longer has that ability to create users or alter users. So we've taken that account management away and separated by a different role. If that's not how your organization works, that's okay. We can grant that role back to SYS, back to system, or preferably back to your named database administrations, your DBA Deborahs, your DBA Riches, those DBAs of the world that have named accounts, and that's who they're connecting as. All right, now that we've created our developer Dave, let's go ahead and see what we can do. Or we're going to grant some privileges to Dave. So we're going to use our SYS because SYS still does grant privileges. And what we're going to do is we're going to grant him the alter any table, select any table, update any table, or delete any privileges. I'd really prefer not to grant these privileges to a user. I'd prefer to use something like privilege analysis, identify what privileges Dave really needs, and then grant those to a role, and then grant that role to Dave instead. But since this is a demo, and since I want to demonstrate that we can actually protect against these any privileges with database vault, I went ahead and granted Dave these any table privileges. All right, so now that we've granted him the privileges, let's go ahead and connect as our developer Dave. And I had a typo here. I typed dev instead of dev Dave. All right, now we're connected. We connected as Dave. Do some basic kind of housekeeping here. We're going to format our SQL Plus environment. We can get a count on our application table. We're going to query a single row here. Ernest Burton, we're going to look at his address. We're going to update Ernest Burton's address. And we're going to just verify that Ernest Burton's address has changed from 1 Linden Lane to 2 Linden Lane. And we don't really want to keep these changes, so we're going to roll them back. So rather than committing it, we're going to roll it back. We just wanted to prove that Dev Dave, our developer, could make these changes to the application schema and the demo HR employees table. All right, so now we're going to connect back at SYS, and we're going to start to build our context and create our packages and do our auditing. So the first thing we're going to do is create our context, create our package, and create our package body. So we've got a package called change info package. You can see in the body it's got one procedure, set value and context. It takes one parameter in, p value, and it runs that dbms session.setContext that we saw on a previous slide. So our context, we created change info, and it uses this package. So we've got our environment set, so we can set this application context. It'll be in our memory for our session. We're going to grant execute to public because we don't really care who executes this. We're going to create a public synonym to make it easier. And then what we're going to do is audit on that context. And I'm going to pause here for a second. So we executed audit context namespace, change info, attribute, change ID. So with the unified audit trail, we can capture these custom contexts and collect this information in our audit trail and then look at it as we go on. So you'll see later in this demo that our security analyst looks at this audit data to see what the value is for this change ID. So this can be really powerful for your security team, or if you're doing auditing, or if you have to demonstrate that everything we did in this session was tied to this change ID. So you can capture all the information and report on it. We're going to create two audit policies as well and enable them. So we've got our create audit policy for everything, our actions all. Our actions all will audit grants, alter tables, audit changes, things like that. And then we're going to create a custom audit policy that audits our DML, right? So we want to audit, select, insert, update, or delete on this specific table, but we only want to do it when the user performing these actions are not employee search, right? So we trust employee search. He's our application owner. We know he's going to do select, insert, update, and delete. We don't want to collect all that audit data. We want to collect it if it's not this user and identify who might be doing that. We're going to enable that audit policy as well. And all right, let's see. We connected the DBA user, our DBA Deborah. And that's how we call our sys context, our custom context, is by using sys context, change info, change ID from dual. And we can see that we have nothing set for that right now. And that's okay. We're just building, we're kind of creating the building blocks here. We want to see that DBA Deborah can query this data. She can also update the employee search table because she is a database administrator. She has the select any table, alter any table, update any table privileges. And again, we're going to roll her back. We don't really want her change to be permanent. We just want to show that she can do it. All right, let's do this. Let's see what we get now. Now what we're going to do is start to enforce our change control policy here with database vault. The first thing we're going to do is create one rule that checks to make sure that our change info context with our change ID is not null. Our second rule just checks to see if you're employee search. If you're employee search, we don't want to stop you from performing your application job, right? We want that application to function as it did before database vault. So essentially, we're exempting employee search from the action. You could get more nuanced with this if you wanted to say, we trust employee search as long as it's coming from these hosts or these IPs or using these programs. So you could combine syscontext with session user, with host or module or program. There's lots of things you could do. You could put an and statement in that rule expression as well. Now what we have to do is we have to create a rule set, and we're going to put these two rules in here and use an or statement. In database vault, we call that evaluate any. So as long as one of these rules is true, you're not going to see this error message. One of the neat things about a rule set is that ability to perform this fail message here. So you can tell your user as soon as they get an error why they get this error. So when we fail, it's going to say cannot perform this action without a change request. And then hopefully our developers or hopefully our DBAs go, oh yeah, that's right. I need to set this. I need to go do this. I need to work on this. So we enforce that paper policy with technical controls. All right, then we're going to go ahead and add these rules to our rule set. We're adding in the first one, our change control ID is set. Adding in our second one here, allow change controls if you're employee search. Now we're going to create our command rule, okay? Our command rule is going to protect the user or anyone from performing an update unless they meet our rule set. So if you're trying to do an update on the employee search.demohr employees table, you have to meet this rule set, allow change controls. So let's try it as Dave. Let's see what happens when Dave does it. Dave can still do a select. Dave can still do a describe. Dave can still do a select. We can see Ernest Burton and his address. Let's run our update that we did before, and immediately Dave gets this error message. Cannot perform this action without a change request. All right, let's verify that our data hasn't changed. We can see that we still have 1 Linden Lane there for before and after values. And we say, you know what? I don't have time for this. I'm going to go talk to Rich. He's my database administrator. He owes me a favor. I'm just going to have him do this. This change control process is just not something I want to do. All right, fine. Let's have our sys log in. We can still query the data. We can look at Ernest Burton, but even sys cannot perform this action unless he has a change request. So we've enforced this control, not just for our developer Dave, but for our highly privileged users within the application or within the database. So again, now both Dave and Rich have to go back and say, all right, buddy, sorry, you've got to get that change control and you've got to set it. All right, fine. I'll check what my session looks like. I'll execute that one command. I'm going to execute that package, change info package, that set value in context. Then I pass it a change request. So this is a change request that I made up, change request 19 for 2019, and it's our 93rd change of the year. We must be only 2 days into January because we have lots of changes normally. But what I want to point out here is that he could set it to whatever he wants, right? In this demo environment, we're just trying to show that he has to go through the process. We're not necessarily enforcing it to the nth degree. We're not enforcing it all the way, but you could. You could have that package and that procedure call a RESTful service on your change management system. It could check the status of that ticket. It could check to make sure it's open. It could make sure it's in progress. It could make sure it's the correct date. Whatever you want to make it do, you could do with PL SQL. PL SQL is so incredibly powerful. And then we combine it with Database Vault. We've got kind of a match made in heaven here. So now Dave has got our session ID, our change ID set. We're going to do our selects again. Now he can perform that update, right? By just setting that change request in a session, we took that address from 1 Linden to 2 Linden Lane. Pretty simple. All right, but what we want to show now is what we see as an auditor. We created a user called Security Admin Owen. Owen logs in and he only has 2 views or 2 roles. He can connect to the database and he can view the audit data. He doesn't look at any application data. He just looks at the audit trail. So we're going to have Owen look at the unified audit trail. We're going to kind of do some formatting here to make these columns look nice, make the rows look nice. And oops, I didn't quite get that line width all the way out, so let's make that a little wider here. All right, so what we can see is we have our query. We have our DBA Deborah querying our object, performing an update, and she was able to perform this. Our return code was 0. That was before we'd enabled Database Vault in our command rule. After we enabled Database Vault, we now have Dave, and we can see that we've got our change control ID there. Okay, so we can kind of go a little further and change this query to see where our change ID matches that change request that we just set. So in our section, we can see that Dave, well, he executed a select count. He queried the first name, last name, username, and address, and then he performed an update statement. So we could centralize some of this in auditing, which is what we would love to do. We'd love to get this in Audit Vault, turn this into alerts if there was something we weren't really sure about. the big thing is we've got to audit, we've got to collect this data, right? As a recovering database administrator myself, we used to have to copy our SQL Plus screens and paste them into this change log to show our auditors that, yes, this is all we did during the session. Well, let's not do that. Let's just have them query the unified audit trail or put it in Audit Vault, and then they can see, based on our application context, what we did during that session. Now remember, Dave could query that table without having his change ID set. Well, that's an easy fix. We just create another command rule to prevent him from even selecting the data unless he has a change ID set. So there's lots of things we can do here. We can prevent truncate. We can prevent alter table. There's lots of things we could do here now that we've got the framework built out. All right, so let's connect to system, or a sys, I'm sorry. Let's kind of go through the same exercise here, right? So we've got our sys user. He can do his queries, but he can't do the updates. All right, well, our DBA can do the updates if he decides to follow the process and set his change control. All right, so we'll increment our change control. We're going to go from 93 to, I think it's 94. We're going to set that in our session. And we're going to see here that we've set it, and we're going to perform our update. So if we do the same update that we did just a second ago where we had the cannot perform this action error message, we can see that our sys user can now perform this. So if Dave went to his DBA and he said, hey, I need this change implemented, then his DBA could say, sure, Dave, I'll do it for you. What's the change control? I can make that happen, and he can set it for a session. If he says, I don't have one, then he says, look, man, I can't do it without having a change control. So we've got this process here. We can control it. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what we can do with Database Vault that goes a little further than maybe basic realms or basic command rules. We can apply an application, create a custom application context, create some custom PL SQL, and then you could see how far we could go, right? By maybe calling those RESTful services, by checking the status of that ticket. There's lots of neat things we can do here. All right, let's move on to our third scenario. We're going to look at Oracle 19c Database Vault Operations Control. So this is new in Oracle Database Vault 19c. We call it Ops Control for short. And our scenario is we have our container admins that can view data in the pluggable databases, right? We want to kind of lock those admins out of the pluggable databases. Security's come to us and said, hey, our administration is outsourced, or we don't want them to look at these HR pluggable databases or financial databases. We want them to do administration on the container and do backups and maintenance and performance tuning, but they shouldn't go query data. Okay, Oracle 19c Ops Control can help us with that. We're going to enable that at the container level, and we're going to walk through a scenario. So our container admin Zeus does not need to access application data. We want to keep him out of that employee search schema. We're going to demonstrate that he can query that data in our pluggable database. We're going to enable it. Again, this should look familiar, right? This is our DBMS MacAdam.enable app protection or disable app protection, right? So you're going to see us use app protection in the documentation or in the database. App protection and ops control are interchangeable. So we're going to execute that a couple different times here, kind of make sure that we can or cannot access that data as Zeus. And one of the neat things I love about this new ops control is just how easy it is to use. It's real simple, and you're going to see that here in a second. All right, so we're back to our SQL Plus. I always try to check the status of what our database vault is. So are we enabled? Are we disabled? Are we configured? Not configured? Kind of what's going on there. So, but first I want to look at Zeus. I see him in the container database, but I don't see employee search. I'm going to connect to this pluggable database, and I'm going to look to see what users I have in there. All right, so I've got our employee search. I've got Zeus. So employee search is a pluggable user. Zeus is a container user. Now let's go check the status of our database vault. Let's see what's going on with it. Our app protection is disabled. Our ops control is disabled. we're configured, and we're enabled at the container level. Let's go look at the pluggable database level and see what's going on. All right, so ops control is disabled. We are configured, but we're disabled at the pluggable database layer. And this is an important point to note here. DB enable status is false in our pluggable database. For ops control, that's okay. We can have database fault disabled in the pluggable, but still have ops control enforcing that separation of our container administrations from our pluggable administrators or our pluggable data, okay? So we could have our business rules, our change controls disabled in the pluggable database. All right, so let's go ahead and connect as our owner. This is our user with our DB owner privilege, and we're going to execute one command, and we're going to enable our ops control in our container database. There it is, dbms-macadam.enable app protection. Let's go check it. Yep, it went from disabled to enabled. Real quick, real easy. Let's connect to our pluggable database now and check the status of that. What do we see there? We see app protection is enabled, so ops control is enabled, and we still see that our database vault is not enabled on this pluggable database. So we can have that ops control protection without having database vault enabled. All right, let's connect to Zeus and let's see what happens here. Let's select data from that employee search schema, look at the demo HR table, and he gets insufficient privileges. Well, but he's Zeus, man. He should be able to do anything he wants. Just to make sure that we're not doing anything wrong, let's go in here. Yeah, it says it's enabled. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and disable it just to make sure that Zeus can access this data in a typical environment. Real quick and easy, disable app protection, disables our ops control. Let's go ahead and check the status of it. Yep, app protection equal disabled. Let's connect back as our Zeus user here. Yeah, C ## Zeus. Got to type the password right. Connect to that container database, pluggable database, I'm sorry. Check the status. Yep, he's disabled. So now Zeus should be able to query this data. To run that same query again, we'll just copy it from above. Yep, so Zeus has the capabilities to query this data without database vault ops control enabled. So since it's so easy, let's just go back and do it again. We'll set it from disabled to enabled. Connect as our DB owner user. Go ahead and run the execute dbms-macadam. Oh, not disable. We want to enable our app protection. We're going to connect to just check that status one more time. We want to see it goes from disabled to enabled. We'll connect as our Zeus user. I'll just kind of demonstrate again that Zeus, even though he is one of the most powerful users in the database, he cannot perform a select on his application data. Okay? Again, ops control is enabled, but database vault is not. So we're not enforcing those application contexts we created, but we could if we wanted to. Okay? So that brings me to kind of my final video here. We're going to take all this and we're going to put all three together. We're going to see what it's like when we have ops control enabled, when we have our custom application context and our command rules in place, and we want to perform a data pump export. So let's put them all together. Let's make sure that we're enabled at the container layer. So we can see that we've got our app protection enabled, our configuration is true, our enabled is true. Within our pluggable database, the same thing, we've got all set to true. Just kind of looking at Zeus to see what roles and what privileges he has. He's a highly privileged user, so he can see and do just about anything he wants, but he cannot query this application data. He gets insufficient privileges. Ops control prevents him from doing that. Okay. All right, now let's connect as sys and just check the same thing. Sys can't do it either, right? Sys, again, is a container administrator. We want our pluggable database administrators accessing this data, or we want to lock people out completely. Let's connect as Dave and check to see if Dave can perform his update. Dave is a pluggable database user. He cannot perform his changes without a change request. All right, fine. Let's follow the process. Let's set it. You can see here that we set our change control ID. We've got our 93 there. Our update was successful. We updated Ernest Burton's information. I'm going to run this again because you don't see that the address changed from 1 Linden to 2 Linden or 2 Linden to 1 Linden. So let's just run it again so we can see that visual change there. Ran it again, set it to change ID. Now Ernest Burton's address went from 1 to 2, 2 to 1. All right, now let's start with kind of in reverse order here. We're going to perform our data pump export of our table. Proxying is our employee search user. You can see that we set our tables equal to employee search.demo HR employees, and we're still using our Oracle Advanced Encryption, so we're encrypting this data pump export. Go ahead and run this guy. It's doing its thing, and success. We're successfully able to export the data. We got 1,000 rows out. We saw that there was 1,000 rows in our query. Well, what about the schema? Let's do the same thing. Instead of saying tables equal, let's say schemas equal. Make sure we're using our Oracle Advanced Security to encrypt this dump. Same thing, it's processing, it's working on it, we're getting there. And yes, success. We successfully unloaded the schema. Now the final test, let's export the database. We're gonna do a full equal Y. We're still gonna encrypt. Let's see if we can get the entire database out. Is our export DB user with ops control enabled, with our change control process enabled, with our command rule on there to prevent updates. We could have expanded that to alter tables or updates or selects or anything, right? And we were successful. So we've successfully combined database vault ops control, our command rules, our change control process, and data pump all together. So we're working really well in our now extra secure, super secure, highly secure database vault environment. So kind of in summary here, because we're running out of time, database vault is a licensed option of the Oracle Database Enterprise Edition, right? Hopefully I've shown you that if you combine this with PL SQL, you can create highly scalable and highly flexible solutions. Database vault audit data, it's high value audit data, right? Take it, collect it, turn it into actionable data, audit it, get it into Audit Vault, create alerts on it, get it somewhere so you can see what's happening. If somebody is failing because of an Audit Vault alert, then we want to know that. In Oracle Database 12.2, we introduced simulation mode so you can test it before enforcing. So if you don't want to go right to enabled for some of these things, you can enable simulation mode and it'll generate that audit data as if it failed, as if it blocked someone from performing an action. So you can look at the audit data to see what's occurring. That way, you don't block the application, you just get those audit records based on it. Oracle 19c is the terminal release of 12.2. Please don't think that's a new release. That's the terminal release of 12.2. Think of it as 12.203. Just like we had 11.204, 19c is just named differently, but it's the terminal release of 12c release 2. Please upgrade to it. Please get to it. It's the last release in the 12.2 environment. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Russ.
Just real quick, because I know we get some people drop off after the technical presentation. Our next AskTOM Database Security Office Hours is going to be Thursday, 12th of September. And I'd mentioned at the start of this that we're very happy to have Oracle DataSafe out for limited availability. Next month's AskTOM will dive into Oracle DataSafe. So please join us there. And with that, let's go ahead and switch over to Q&A. All right, real quick, before we dig into Q&A, I know we always lose some people at the end of the technical presentation. So before you go, next office hours will be Thursday, 12th of September. Our topic is tentatively, and hopefully not too tentative, going to be Oracle DataSafe. I talked about the fact that we went limited availability on this yesterday. We're really looking forward to telling you more about it next month as it progresses, and by then we'll have a full month of experience under our belt. So really exciting topic. Hope to see you next month. And with that, let's go ahead and get to Q&A. What came in over chat had a question about when will we see, or how will we see that where DBSAT is released? And we talked about the MOS note 213.8254.1. We'll probably have a blog post on it. We usually do with any new release. And of course, we'll update our Oracle Technology Network page. And I put the links for both the blogs and the OTN page in chat. Our note asked the question, Rich, this is one you might want to weigh in on. And I'm going to just kind of read. I'm a DBA running DB12C. Didn't say what there's R1, R2, but I don't think that it's important for this. I'd like to know the best way you recommend to give access in mandatory realms where they need as part of whatever their rules are to evaluate username logged into the database. And what I recommended was to either do it by a role, and that could be a standard role or a secure application role, or you could do a login trigger that does a lookup and sets a syscontext variable.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good suggestion. I think this is a great question. And I think we could do a use case on this too, because I've got some material around doing this. And I think your initial idea of using a role is a great one. You could do a after login trigger. You could create a custom table with a list of users in there where you could have that table as well, and you could look at that table. So you would have to protect that role or protect that after login trigger. You'd have to protect that table with database vault too. But yeah, no, you could certainly do this rather than including 50 or 100 users in there with a in and having to add that in. I would probably say the role is the best way to go. And the role also gives you that advantage of integrating maybe with a Active Directory or an LDAP solution, right? So using centrally managed users and using that capability to connect to Active Directory and using that where we have groups in Active Directory that have the usernames and they map to users in the database. And that way, maybe we take some of that workload off the database administrators and get that into the identity and access solution instead. So, yeah, Russ, I think roles is probably the best way to go. What do you think?
Well, as you said, there's so many things you can do. You can look it up in a PAM solution. There's probably a million ways to skin that cat, but role was the first one that came to mind for me. So
yeah.
Good deal. No. And then Arnaud put the call in there, and I think that was the right one. User has role varchar. Perfect. Jim asked a question about recovering space from unified audit, and unfortunately we don't have Angelin on the call, but he asked, how do you recover space from unified audit? Say you had 60 days and started collecting the data via Audit Vault with a purge policy of every 3 hours. And I asked the question, do you have the unified audit in its own table space? Jim confirmed that yes, he did. And then I said, well, once you do that, if it's in its own table space, then you treat it pretty much like anything else. You could move the audit trail to a completely new table space and just drop the old one. That would be the most extreme way. You could just shrink the segment and then resize the data file. But you pretty much do it like any other segment at that point, other than you can't delete the data without purging it. You do have to purge the data. See, and Jim added another question. Is it possible to protect some specific subprogram usage of DBMS audit management with Database Vault? We could, DBMS audit management is owned by SIS.
Yeah,
so, yeah. No, Jim, not really. You can't put a command rule on an object that is owned by SIS. So you can block SIS from doing things, but if it belongs to SIS, then you can't put a command rule on it. It's funny, I was talking, it was either with you, Rich, or with Alan this morning, but I was saying, it would really be great to start moving some of these packages out of the SIS schema. I know that presents other challenges, but the limitation of having in SIS does keep us from doing things like that.
Now there is the role audit viewer and audit manager, or audit owner. I forget the two terms there. Audit admin, I think. So if your DBAs have audit viewer, they shouldn't be able to execute the DBMS audit management package. So Jim, do you want them to execute? I mean, can it be an all or none scenario, or are there certain things in there that they need to audit? I mean, could we cron something that checks to see if it's above a certain date, or does something there that just kind of clears those things off every 7 days, or let Audit Vault do that for you and just let your DBAs have Audit Viewer?
Oh, that's a good point. Do you know if SIS has, or if DBA has Audit Viewer or Audit Admin by default?
If DBA does, I don't, but I can probably find out. Let's see.
We can look to
Jim, you
test
may have
that
a better answer.
if Audit
Yeah,
View.
'cause, yeah.
If that's the case, you could protect the Audit Admin role, because you can protect a role with the database vault policy.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to test it here. I don't have I'm trying to test it on the fly here, and of course, when you're trying to do something in real time, it doesn't work like you want it to. So.
Yeah, if anyone on the call happens to have a database handy 12C or higher, just log in as a DBA and select star from session _ roles, where the role name is like audit %. See if you have Audit Admin. I think DBA does not have Audit Admin by default. I seem to remember having to grant it to administer it, and if so, then that's a really good way to control it.
Nope, he doesn't. Yeah, so I created a rich test user, and I granted him DBA role, and then I did a select star from session roles as that user. He has capture admin, full export, full import, but he doesn't have audit anything. So he doesn't have Audit Admin or Audit Viewer.
Okay, thanks, Rich.
Yeah.
So Jim, there's your answer. You would not grant the Audit Admin role to your DBAs, just grant them Audit Viewer, and they shouldn't be able to do anything to change a timestamp, purge the audit trail, anything to change the audit procedures.
Thanks, that's awesome. We'll give it a try.
Yeah,
excellent.
Thanks, Jim.
We're a little past the start or top of the hour, but if any other questions before we shut down?